Aadi, would you like to start it off?
Yeah. So, hello everyone. Welcome back to notsosrs, the student podcast for students by students. I messed up the introduction there, but you know what? We're all with it. My name is Aditya. I'm a first-year law and business student at the University of Warwick.
And I'm Leo, a third-year computer science student at Sunway University. And today we have a special guest. Professor Hew Gill is currently the Associate Provost of Sunway University, a psychology professor. He holds a Master's in Science from Oxford University and a Doctorate in Philosophy from Leeds, to say the least. And Aadi, would you like to introduce the topic?
Yes. So, given Professor Hew's experience in education, we decided to talk about students and how they perceive the pandemic and what they can do better as they approach schools opening up and as they approach the impending doom of the job market. And so it's a conversation surrounding the bleak environment going on right now and how do we make it better. So welcome, Professor Hew. How are you doing today?
Very, very well, thank you, Aadi. It's lovely to be with you. Lovely to be with you again, Leo. And you guys looking very fit and healthy, so you've clearly had a very good pandemic so far.
I wish it was the same for everyone. I've been quite all right. I've been working and thankfully I am about to fly off to the UK to do my degree. I leave in a couple of days actually. And Leo, how are you, man?
I'm pretty good. Just started the third year of university, so I'm right in the thick of it.
Right. So let's kind of dive in. I figured a good place to start would probably be to look at the past, because I think that's a very good platform for us to discuss the current pandemic. So Professor Hew, I just want to talk about some major incidents in the recent past that have put students in a similar predicament. Namely, I think the 2008 financial crisis or the Asian financial crisis comes to mind. And if we look at trends, for example, we see the 2008 financial crisis caused unemployment in the US to be about 10%. And with COVID, it's about 14%. And you see that these numbers are strikingly high. And with the Asian financial crisis as well, you saw students being affected the most, especially with them coming out to the job market. They couldn't find jobs that paid as much as their predecessors did, and so on. So Professor Hew, could you shed some light on those incidents and what you can remember from that time?
Well, I can go back even further than that. So I can remember recessions going back to the 1970s. Yeah, gosh, I am that old. Yes, and I'm still breathing. I know it's a shock. But, the fact is that economies are cyclical. They go up, they go down. And obviously, there are times when it can be perhaps more difficult to get a job, but the economy always recovers. So there are always opportunities out there. Now, the current pandemic is, of course, a crisis of a different order. It's not a financial crisis as such. It's obviously driven by this awful virus and the terrible impact that it's having on people around the world, particularly, of course, older people. But I would say that it's a shame. I think that younger people's economic futures have been affected so badly when they themselves are not susceptible to the virus. And I think now some countries are coming to terms with that the virus is going to be endemic. It's going to be here forever. It's going to be just like the flu and the common cold, which are also coronaviruses. So we're going to need to learn to live with it. And as young people, you're at a substantially lower risk than older people. So it should not really affect you as much in terms of your economic progress and in terms of job opportunities. But let's come back to this idea of opportunities. Behind me, you can see on my virtual background, clouds. Yeah, and there is no such thing as a cloud without a silver lining. There are always opportunities out there, right? So the pandemic has already started, for example, driving even faster the transfer to online business. And thinking about probably most of the people who are going to be watching this podcast, you're in a really fantastic position. You're highly educated. You speak probably 1, 2, maybe 3 global languages, and you now have an economy that accepts meeting like we're meeting now. You don't need to be in the same room anymore to do business. So if you've got an internet link, you've got a sharp mind, you've got opportunities to make money globally in a way that wasn't even possible 2.5 years ago. People were not used to doing business online in a way they are now. So why not seize that opportunity? Don't look at this as a negative, look at it as a potential positive. You could be competing for business on another continent. So why don't you?
That was actually, that's a really, really nice turn. And I do want this podcast to be a rather positive one. So ladies and gentlemen, for everyone listening at home, there is a positive to this. The pandemic has made making money a lot easier online. And I will also add, while we're on the topic of students, I think Professor Hew made a really good point on the online interactions with people. And I think that this pandemic has really shed light on online education, because I think that previously there was always this barrier between physical schools, going to university, going to high school, versus doing online courses. For example, Coursera, EDX, they offer fantastic online courses that previously had a lot of stigma around it when things were quote unquote normal. But I think that right now, I think a lot of people can understand when I say the phrase that I would much rather do a course on Harvard than attend my university lecture, because honestly, they are about the same. Whereas the Harvard course kind of gives me a little bit more advantage, so to speak, with the name brand or whatever. And I think that it's a really, really interesting concept, because I think this showed there's a lot more opportunity to learn as well. I'm seeing more and more students rely a lot more on online opportunities and free things online than actually universities and high schools. So I think it's a very interesting thing. Leo, what do you think?
No, I agree with everything has been said so far. But also we have potentially already seen an explosion with the gig economy and freelancing and working from home. So I think there are already a lot of people taking advantage of the fact that they can just do the business online, and you can basically get services, or for example, graphical design can be done completely online. You don't even have to meet the person at all. You can just commission it and someone will take it up. So yeah, there is a lot of opportunity.
That's great. Professor Hew, I do want to go into one small rabbit hole here, and look at how I personally think that this pandemic did kind of expose a lot of flaws in different systems. Obviously, government being one big system that was very, very transparently flawed through this whole pandemic. But I think also education was one big thing, and students started to see and rise up to a lot of the things that I think schools, universities tend to do wrong. And I just wanted to get your comment on things like that. For example, I guess one case would be, why hasn't fees gone down when you're at home learning? There's no electricity fees or whatever. So could you comment on that?
Well, that's of course a question I get asked an awful lot. I'll come back to fees in just a moment, and it may be something you want to talk to me a little bit more about. But let's come back first to this idea of flaws. I'm not necessarily sure that's a fair way of looking at it. Now, you can say that the pandemic was predictable. Yes, it was predictable. In fact, this is what, the third coronavirus in the last 15 years that's come from China. So obviously they dealt much more quickly with MERS and SARS. And unfortunately, COVID-19 got on a plane and got around the world a lot quicker. But no matter how much planning you do, there's no way of saying that the pandemic we're experiencing this time is the same as, for example, Spanish flu at the end of the First World War. Clearly it isn't. For a start, people can get on planes now in a way they couldn't do 100 years ago. Even within their own homes and towns, people are a lot more mobile than they were 100 years ago. How many people had cars in 1919, right? How many youngsters were able to go and socialize with people more than maybe a mile or two away from their home? So all those kinds of factors have got to be considered when we think about how governments have responded. Similarly, looking at education, the actual classic model of education in a university is amazingly robust, right? It's 1,000 years old. So, you think Bologna and Oxford are 1,000 years old, the world's oldest surviving universities. And by that, I mean true universities that have had a broad curriculum teaching more than a single discipline. And why do these places originally exist? Well, they exist because of the price of books. Think about it. Every book 1,000 years ago is handwritten. So if you want to know what's in the book, there aren't many books. What do? You go and sit down in a large room and somebody stands up the front and reads the book. You call that person a lector. I think you're probably beginning to understand where we get the word lecture from. So that model's been pretty resilient for 1,000 years, despite the invention of movable type printing 500 years ago, which drove down the price of books, despite the invention of radio, despite the invention of television. And it's only this pandemic that's actually caused us to think that model afresh and realize there's an awful lot of stuff we can do online. But the thing is, university isn't about learning stuff. Most people make that mistake. They think it's about the discipline. So Aadi, you may be off to Warwick and you may be going to learn law. Fantastic. But actually, what you're going to do at Warwick is a lot more than learn law. It's about being with a lot of other bright young people. It's about discovering who you are, finding out about them and deciding who you want to be. It's about being around a lot of old people like me who've got a bit of experience and hopefully some knowledge of our discipline, who can help you on that journey of self-discovery, who can help you find out what you're good at, where you perhaps need to improve, the things you don't like, how you want to spend the rest of your life, how we can help guide you to learn to think, to be a critical thinker, an engaged person, to help you make some of the choices that will make you be a happier and more filled adult. You can't really do that on Zoom or Teams. You can't just bump into people in the corridor on Zoom and have a 5-minute chat. You can't just spontaneously go for a coffee with somebody on Teams. You can't just pop into the library and see something extra on the shelf that you weren't looking for that suddenly catches your eye and makes you want to read and maybe takes you in a whole completely different direction. So actually being physically with people on campus is really what the university's experience is about. And I wrote an article fairly recently in which we actually quoted the research we've done with students showing that the campus experience is central to what it is to be a student. And without the campus experience, you're not really attending a university. You're just learning stuff. And hey, what, you know, MOOCs, we had MOOCs when I was your age. Really? Yes, we used to call it television, right? On would come an expert, and if it was made by the BBC, over 13 hours, right? Normally 1 hour a week for 13 weeks, a quarter of the year, that expert would deliver the most amazing, we used to call them programs, but they were actually lectures. You can buy these on DVD. So things like Kenneth Clark's Civilization, if you want to understand the rise of the Western artistic tradition, right? Watch Civilization. If you want to understand the rise of Western science, watch The Ascent of Man by Jacob Bronowski. These were MOOCs. I have to say, much better film than even modern MOOCs.
At this point, I reveal myself in my true colors as a stick in the mud.
That's what they were. So this is nothing new. Yet we still wanted to go to university to be with other young people. So let me now come to the resources and fees issue. Why haven't the universities cut the fees? Well, that's actually because, believe it or not, doing it online is just as expensive and in many cases more expensive than doing it the old way. So many universities, including Sunway, were already transitioning to delivering some things online. Of course we were. But in most cases, what we were doing was equipping our lecture theatres with cameras to record traditional style lectures. We had never foreseen that we'd have to go into lockdown, send everybody home and equip every single member of staff to be an online lecturer overnight. That cost a lot of money, right? Because people who had desktops suddenly needed to have laptops. We suddenly need to invest in all the necessary equipment for them to do all this stuff from home. Secondly, the systems to do it. That's expensive. It costs a lot of money to invest in Zoom, to invest in Teams, to invest in all these different platforms, and to make them accessible to students. Thirdly, e-resources. So we've had to produce, for example, a much greater number of ebooks. So certainly the experience we had in Sunway is that many students would often borrow a book, and then maybe 4 or 5 students would go and socially read through the book together. It would become a social event to talk about something together. You can't do that with an ebook. Each person needs one copy, and ebooks are expensive. Shockingly, in fact, they're often more expensive than traditional textbooks. And as soon as the publisher upgrades the ebook, guess what? The price goes up. Some publishers also want a paper borrow. So actually expanding all those kinds of resources has cost more money. And then, of course, the campuses haven't gone away. So we still need to maintain all of those facilities. So in some way, can you imagine what would happen if we just switched off the aircon and went home? Well, the building would fall down. So all of the usual cleaning, security, maintenance, investment in facilities has had to continue. We can't suddenly stop our investment plans because of the pandemic. So all of those costs on campus have continued, along with all of the staff costs, which are our biggest cost by far, plus all the additional investment in extra e-resources and new systems. And I haven't even touched on all the things like welfare, counselling, support, dealing with students who are trapped in airports around the world, dealing with students from overseas who suddenly run out of money, dealing with all the problems with lockdowns, students trying to travel between jurisdictions. All of that has had to be dealt with. And of course, we didn't have systems to do that because we never dealt with those kinds of problems. And we've then had to move everything else online. So if you want to enroll in a course, well, fair enough, you could do all that online. But in the past, if you wanted to change, you would probably go and see somebody and ask about what you could do and what you couldn't do. Well, we've had to make all of that available online. And that's taken new systems, building new systems. So actually, our costs have gone up. The pandemic has cost us a lot more money than we'd expected. And there've also been some funny, we might get into, some funny other things that have happened as a result of the pandemic that we could never have predicted that have cost us additional money. So turning it around for a moment, we could actually say, why aren't we putting up the fees to cover all these additional costs? But we're not. Obviously, what we're trying to do is maintain as far as we possibly can access at the lowest possible cost that we can. And we're trying to maintain running essentially two systems, online and face-to-face, because again, when we hope to reopen fairly soon in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we think we'll be able to reopen campus. We're going to have to run everything hybrid. We'll have to run everything face-to-face and online at the same time. That's not a cheap option. It's going to increase our costs again substantially. But hey, you know, we're in the business of managing this, and we will come through the other side. And as I said at the beginning, it's an opportunity. So we have learned that we can do some things better online. And it means the mix of what we offer in the future will be different, I think, to what perhaps we were doing 2 to 2.5 years ago. And I think that's going to be better for everybody. So I'm going to pause there. I've talked a lot. I'm sure you've got some questions and comments of your own.
Yes, thank you so much. I think it's I've never actually considered the fact that you are actually running two systems, the fact that you have the offline infrastructure to still maintain, and obviously the cost of ebooks and training and systems and so on, so forth. So I think that's a very interesting insight to put out. And by the way, for the people listening at home, wherever you are listening in, MOOCs stand for Massive Open Online Courses, which are the traditional online courses that you find on Harvard or EDX and so on and so forth. And Leo and I will link the article that Professor Hew was talking about in the show notes below, and hopefully you guys can give that a read and understand the impact about being on campus university. But something I do want to ask Professor Hew, I just want to circle back onto what you talked about, which is the infrastructure or the system that university or the classical education system is built on, with the concept of lectures and the cost of books and so on and so forth, and how over the years, especially I think over the last 10 or 5 years, education or information has become a lot more accessible. And as such, I still understand, I still think that university is incredibly important for all of the non-disciplinary related things that you get, experiences, the network, being able to just be around someone who has a lot more experience than you, I think is very, very valuable. But, at its core, which is about teaching a discipline, I'm still of the opinion that delivering the content wise, I think that universities have to rethink their model of how they teach the discipline. Whether that be integrating more digital, more online, more updated systems that actually incorporate what practical information is out there, or whether it's by drumming down on more experiences and removing the emphasis on disciplinary content. I just wanted to get your opinion on, if we were to rethink how we ran universities, what do you think is something that is best focused on, or should be?
Okay, well, again, you're talking about another area I've done a little bit of writing around. This was pre-pandemic. And I was thinking about the gamification of education. Now, most people think of this in terms of things like the certificates and short-term goals to keep you motivated. And fine, that is part of gamification. But the logical endpoint of this is that we are going to fractionalize, we're going to reduce the size of rewards into a series of discrete, potentially micro-credentials is the buzzword at the moment. So you're studying law, Leo is studying IT and computing. But what if both of you want to learn something from those